What is up, everybody, and welcome to the All-NBA Show, powered by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com/All-NBA. I'm your host, Adam Mares. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Tim Legler. Legs, happy Friday to you.
Yeah, man. Ready to have a great show here before we get into the weekend. We got some good stuff here because there were a couple games that were very interesting, and then there's just some bigger picture stuff around the league right now that's starting to heat up as we turn the page on a new year. So this is going to be a great show. I'm looking forward to it.
We're going to mix up our format a little bit today, and maybe going forward, we're going to hit you with some quick hitters here as we get warmed up. We are going to break down in detail the Celtics and the Wolves game. I thought that was interesting, and Anthony Edwards had some interesting comments afterwards. And we went to the mailbag afterwards. You guys sent like 50 great questions. Make sure you're following us on social media so you can get those questions in. We're going to hit on a couple of those before turning our attention to the weekend slate. But first, Legs, let's get loose with a couple quick hitters. The Warriors blew out the 76ers last night. That was one of the games that happened. 76ers had been playing well, but that matchup, you wonder about Joel Embiid's ability to guard some of these teams that are a little more perimeter oriented. His defense, his offense has been looking good. He had 28 and 14 last game, had a good offensive game. But defensively, I wonder about him and his ability to guard those teams. What do you see?
Well, here's what I'm going to say. First of all, I was the one dude that stayed up and watched that game from start to finish. Why? I don't know. I was having a hard time sleeping, so I kept it on because it was obvious pretty early that if there's ever a night when you're going to watch a team that completely fell victim to the mentality of playing two games in a row, it was the Sixers. They were from the very beginning of the game. They were physically and mentally not there and prepared to compete at the level you need to win in this league. It's that simple. And of course, immediately, the commentators get into the back-to-back factor, which you know how I feel about that. Makes my stomach turn every time. Every time I hear somebody say that teams are playing two nights in a row, and it's just unthinkable that you can put an athlete through that and have them come out and compete. Philadelphia, and it's like, do they have dead legs, or are they dead between the ears? Like mentally, they're not they're not fighting their way through it. And that's the approach they had. Golden State has been really struggling. And to allow them to find that kind of rhythm, and I could show you a dozen clips in the first half of this game that were as bad as it gets defensively in this league in terms of effort, changing ends of the floor, just commitment to it, want to. They didn't have any of it, and they just bought into the mentality that, hey, we have an excuse to lose tonight. That's literally what I was thinking, Adam, when I was watching the game. They had an excuse to lose, and they just jumped all over that excuse. And Golden State smelled it, took advantage of it. And to their credit, they played fast the entire game. Philadelphia had no stomach for the fight and what it was going to take to slow them down to give themselves a chance. And you end up with a 34-point win. Curry, of course, has a perfect night from the three-point line. So he hasn't been playing up to his normal level lately, but he had it going last night. 30 points, double-digit assists, 8 threes on 8 attempts. He was fantastic. But to me, the story of the game was the lack of participation of the Philadelphia 76ers. They just bought into the fact that, hey, man, we got a built-in reason not to be good tonight. And they're mentally were not tough enough to find a way to get into that game. That to me was what that was all about.
Sheesh. Harsh, but I think probably fair, to be honest with you. The other game I want to talk about here, the Bucks have lost 3 of 4 to the Brooklyn Nets, including last night, 113-110. Nets built a big first half lead and held on as the game kind of wound down. but the Bucks have lost 3 of 4 to Brooklyn. I'm curious if you think there's something about the matchup there. And then also the Bucks have lost 3 of 4 just regular. They lost to Brooklyn twice, Chicago, and they beat Indiana. So both of those things, like, what's your perspective?
They cooled off
Yep.
here, and it was interesting because they grabbed so much real estate, right? It was amazing. Like they were one of the stories really around the league with how hot they got. I don't know that there's something into this particular team. Like it wouldn't make any sense
Cam
that Brooklyn
Thomas,
would
maybe.
present this kind of a matchup problem. It doesn't add up. So you look at, okay, so they lost, it was like very early. I don't know, first 3-4 games of the year they played them, they lost. That's when the Bucks were really struggling out of the gate. They were 2-8 to start the year. So they get them
Okay.
early. And then Milwaukee beats them the next time they play. But now
Right.
here they get them twice in a period of a week. And the one common factor in these last 2 games was the Bucks' propensity to turn the ball over and Brooklyn's ability to capitalize on those, because that is, to me, still the biggest challenge for Milwaukee, is changing ends of the floor defensively. They are a slow team when you get them to have to sprint back on defense and match up. They do not do that very well. And in those 2 losses to this team, they had 60 points they gave up off of turnovers. 60. I mean, you really don't have a chance to win in this league, and they were still close games. So Milwaukee, they're right there, despite the fact they were that sloppy with the basketball. And Brooklyn, they took advantage of it by converting those, because that is one area that Milwaukee really struggles. If you can get them to turn the ball over, you got a great chance. And people might say, well, that's true about every team. Well, yeah, some teams recover off of that exceptionally well with their team defensive speed, ability to get back, communicate. Cross matches aren't as big a deal because of their personnel. There are really good teams in this league that do not get murdered every night they turn the ball over. Milwaukee, I feel like, does. And they did in these 2 games against Brooklyn. So if that's a theme that somehow Brooklyn is able to force them into turnovers, I'm not sure why it would be when you look at their personnel. There's other teams in this league that you would think would be able to do that to Milwaukee pretty regularly. I don't know that I would put Brooklyn in that category. So I don't know. Is it just a flukish thing? Not sure. But give Brooklyn credit. Right? They went 3 out of 4 against that team on the year.
There might be something to it. I mean, it's curious to kind of keep your eye on them. But I think more importantly, just like the Lakers last year, you win the in-season tournament. Everybody says, okay, are they back? Did they figure it out? Well, they're playing 500 since then. So, it's just something to keep your eye on, as we were feeling really good about the Bucks after they beat Oklahoma City. Speaking of beating Oklahoma City, we joked about this when it happened. They lose the in-season tournament game, but that game does not count, Legs. It doesn't count. So what do you know? The Thunder are on a 13-game win streak, right? Air quotes. The longest win streak of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's career is right now, even though there's a loss in the middle of it that doesn't count. So are you counting this win streak personally as the longest of Shai's career? But also, in more serious note, they have won, even if you count that loss, 13 of the last 14 games. They've been great all year, but they're on a heck of a run right now.
13 out of 14, 17 out of 19. But no, it is not a winning streak, Adam. You can't gaslight me. You can't gaslight me into telling me something is occurring that didn't occur. They lost a game.
James, what does it say in the standings? If I go to
ESPN.com, the most
ESPN.com,
important one they played during that stretch, they lost.
Yeah.
So no, but look, bottom line is this is how the league wants to approach it. So what choice do you have? I mean, if they were to go on and break the record and win 34 straight, I mean, it would be a very controversial situation here. I don't think that's going to happen. But look, here's the deal. This team is just absolutely cooking people. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been sensational all year, but particularly during this stretch, their defense and what they do to teams on a nightly basis, their quickness, the way that they play, help recover, close out basketball is a clinic every night. They're fun to watch, man. And look, last year, I didn't think they were ready. This year, they look like they have taken a huge step forward in terms of their mental readiness, being capable of being up to the challenge of what it's going to take to get to the finals and who knows, potentially win the whole thing. They're in that short list of teams that you could see winning it all. I didn't feel that way about them at all last year. This team, absolutely, the way they defend, to me, sets them apart, and why I believe more in this team than it did a year ago. They're a year older. They had a couple of key acquisitions, but it's all coming together for them right now, man. They're just steamrolling people.
They lost Chet Holmgren on the 10th of November. They've lost 3 games since then. Just absolutely insane that they could maintain this level, but despite losing one of their great players. Lastly, though, these quick hitters, Jimmy Butler, everybody saw it. It was making the rounds yesterday. He has 9 points for the second straight game, doesn't play in the fourth quarter. Clearly, he is sad and tanking his value, but he goes to the podium yesterday and says, I just want my joy back. And then somebody asked, do you think that could happen in Miami? He said, I'm happy in the city, but not basketball-wise. And no, probably not. What do you make? Pat Riley came out and said, we're not trading you. We know that he is a guy that'll dig his heels in and do what's best for the team, not necessarily give in to pressure. But Jimmy Butler is going to test that, it seems, by not really playing hard, being sad, and then talking about it in his postgame. What do you make of this?
It's really, something else. But this is why, first of all, I'm not a big believer in organizations making blanket statements about players, because too much can change too quickly, particularly with a guy like Jimmy Butler, whose name has surfaced multiple times over the last several years. So you kind of know his track record. Last year, they seemed fed up with him a little bit at the end of the year when he wasn't playing, and we got to social media and was like talking some trash on social media, despite the fact that he wasn't on the court contributing, trying to help his teammates. And Pat Riley seemed like he'd had enough of that, told him to shut it down, basically, which we all were kind of like, wow, that was, it was big by Pat Riley to like take that stance publicly against the player. But that's what he did. And he was very blunt in addressing that at the time. And you come into this year, it's the same stuff with Jimmy Butler. The regular season doesn't seem to be all that important to him. So when he hears this from Pat Riley, clearly what he's doing right now is saying, oh, really? Okay. Well, let's see. Let's see how much you're willing to go and how much you're willing to endure and not trade me. That's literally what he's doing the last couple of games. And, Eric Spoelstra last night could have been a lot harsher on Jimmy Butler when asked about the fact that he didn't play in the fourth quarter. He basically said, well, we were going with the group that had done more for us, and we were trying to close it out with that group. What he really should have said, he would have been honest if he said it, was what we wanted to play guys that cared. So that's who was on the court, guys that cared tonight, because that's really what it was about. He was a minus 27 in 27 minutes. He takes 6 shots in 27 minutes. His usage rate was 12%, which is like the lowest of the year. So you add it all up. Jimmy Butler didn't want to engage in the game. And the Miami Heat are now in a tough spot because they said they're not trading him. And Jimmy Butler looks like he's going to do everything in his power to force it. So where does this go? Your guess is as good as mine, Adam. I don't know where this is going to lead, but I do think it will ultimately end up in Jimmy Butler playing somewhere else.
This is Jimmy Butler's 4th time doing this, by the way, and it's always funny because he's a high-profile enough player, but maybe just below high-profile enough for this to really stick on him. But this is how it always ends with Jimmy. It's never like, it went well, and now it's time to move on. It always is a fiasco at the end. And
hey, listen, and last point on this, Adam, and having said all of that about Jimmy Butler, and I think you kind of know my feelings on this. His approach just doesn't jive with me at all. These kinds of things. Having said that, there is no doubt in my mind that Jimmy Butler has a gear that he will be able to tap into if he ends up somewhere else and be very good in important games for whoever he would end up with. There's no doubt. It's not like I think Jimmy Butler's like washed or he needs to retire. He has another playoff run in him with a team where it's like you're noticing Jimmy Butler every trip, and if he goes someplace, especially where he doesn't have to, perform offensive miracles the way that he had to with some of these Heat teams in big spots, I think he could be a massive difference maker for somebody, depending on what the price is going to be. So it's not like I don't think he can play. I know he can still play. I know he has that in him. But do you want to take on a guy that is willing to conduct himself like this? and
Right.
who has made it pretty clear regular season is just not going to be that important to him. You know, I guess it all is going to come down to what do you have to give up to get them, and how close are you to really contending? Because to me, unless you're going to contend this year and every
Yeah.
year of the next 2 or 3 that you have them, you don't make this move. You don't make this move if you're like a playoff team or a play-in team. You need to
Right. Right.
be a team that adds them and can contend. Conference finals or finals worthy. That to me is what you do. That's the only teams to me that would make a lot of sense to try to get him. And I do think he could bring that kind of value to somebody. This is going to be interesting to see how this plays out because of the position Pat Riley took and what Jimmy Butler's done since.
I think Pat Riley's history tells us it's going to play out in a stalemate where he'll just ride it out and go into free agency and say, hey, walk away from your $53 million if you want to. Helps us out, gives us some flexibility. So I think that's how it ends. But who knows? Maybe to your point, a Houston or a Denver blinks. One of these teams that you're mentioning is in that top 4 spot, and they say, hey, let's do it. Let's take the risk. All right, let's take a break. On the other side, we're going to go deep on the Timberwolves and the Celtics. It was a very interesting game, and perhaps even more interesting was the post-game comments from Anthony Edwards that I cannot wait to talk to Legs about. We'll get to that on the other side. First, the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. You can bet on which player will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. All kinds of player props and live props, so you can get in on the action even if you missed opening kickoff. Just visit FanDuel.com/AllNBA to join today. This way you'll be all set for the biggest games of the year. That's FanDuel.com/AllNBA for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older and present in select states. Or 18 plus and present in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelpline.ma.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Also want to tell you guys about Shady Rays. They got their best deal of the season going on over at Shady Rays. They've got you covered with premium polarized shades that won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent sunglass company offering a world-class product rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Their shades have durable frames and crystal clear optics, making them the perfect choice for all outdoor adventures. They have hundreds of options to choose from, so you're bound to find the perfect pair to match your style. And they even have, or almost certainly have, glasses in your favorite team's colors, so you can wear them to the game. If you're going to a football game out in the cold, they've even got those ski goggles you can go. If you're like in Buffalo and you have those outdoor games, you have to bundle up so that not even your eyeballs are touching. You ever been so cold that your eyeballs get cold? Well, they have these like ski goggles that'll probably be perfect for those Buffalo football games. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com and use the code AC35 for 35% off of polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, back to your segment 2. Throw us a like if you're enjoying the show. Make sure that you're subscribed. We are now doing a new thing where we're doing mini pods in between our live pods. We had a great one on Russell Westbrook's chemistry with Nikola Jokic the other day. We've got one with Mark Stein coming up over the weekend. So make sure you're subscribed and you will never miss any of our pods or mini pods. But segment 2 now. So last night, the Boston Celtics get the win over the Timberwolves, 118-115. They opened up the game with a big run in the second quarter and held on for most of the game, although they blew it in the fourth quarter when Minnesota took a lead. But down the stretch, Minnesota just has looked dysfunctional, hasn't been able to like get easy buckets. They were getting some tough ones, but they had to work for all of them. Meanwhile, the Celtics do what they do, which is make a bunch of threes. 22 of them, in fact, and they pulled out the win. So what did you see, before we get into Anthony Edwards' comments, what did you see about this game that you found interesting?
I think the first thing that kind of jumped out to me was just Jayson Tatum was sensational in this game. And I thought he had, look, he's still he still takes too many threes, probably for my liking. I say the same thing about Anthony Edwards, actually. But I just
For
felt
sure.
that in this game, Jayson Tatum took 17 threes. That's too many threes. But he was in command of the game. And his playmaking was critical because he was able to drag double teams and accept double teams and still find guys and promote ball movement, knowing that he's going to be the highest shot volume taker on the court, particularly when you don't have Jaylen Brown on the floor. You know that number is going to be even higher. The discrepancy between him and anybody else on the floor, like he's going to be hunting shots. 17 threes is too many shots for Jayson Tatum from that deep. And he only shot 6 for 17, not a great night. But it's weird because on a night when he didn't shoot particularly well from out there, and by the way, he was 7 for 10 on twos, to my point. He's got such a good mid-range game. He's so good at beating his initial defender and with his length getting to the rim, even against shot blockers. I just feel like he doesn't mix it up quite well enough. And despite that, he was so far and above the best player on the floor. And you're trying to go head to head, like with your Anthony Edwards, like that's your barometer for the night. And look, I know Anthony Edwards, and we're going to talk about this. He's frustrated with the double teams he's getting, and maybe the spacing's not great on this team. The shooting isn't there to help him. But I think when I was watching and I was saying to myself, Jayson Tatum is a superstar. He's a superstar. And he's been that for a long time in this league. And if you watch Jayson Tatum, he does his thing just about every night. One
Very
way or
consistent.
another. He does. And you and I have talked about this. I'm big on like when we try to label guys, like where they're at in the league and superstar, star, all-star, like these labels we give them.
Right.
And one of the things that I would say is
I love this.
The superstars get to their production every single night, no matter the coverage, no matter who's out for their team, no matter what goes on. And it doesn't mean they have great shooting nights all the time, but they still have their fingerprints all over it all. And I was watching the game, and that's what I was saying to myself. Jayson Tatum's a superstar, and Anthony Edwards is not there yet. Doesn't mean he can't get there. And I'm not trying to say that, Anthony Edwards can't play. But Anthony Edwards, we tried to put him someplace, I think, at the end of last year and put him on a certain level in this league. And I think you're seeing how hard that is to do. I believe he's had under 20 points 7 of his last 10 games. Like the great ones, the truly great ones, the superstars in this league, you're not going to see those kind of stretches. Not for all league caliber players. They don't have runs like that with over a period of 3 weeks where they've got 7 games where they're below their scoring average. Or not even below their scoring average, well below. 7 games, 19 or less.
Just bad games.
And so as I'm watching it, Adam, honestly, that was my first takeaway. Jayson Tatum deserves to be put on a certain level in this league, and I think Anthony Edwards is not quite there. Doesn't mean he can't get there. He's younger than Jayson Tatum, but I felt like we were a little premature with where we put Anthony Edwards at the end of last year. And again, I'm going to say the same thing about him I said about Tatum. He's fallen in love with the three-point shot to such an extent. And I've been saying this all year long. I don't like the imbalance there. Wasn't as bad necessarily in this game. Anthony Edwards, 9 of them, but on 16 shots only. And then Boston was doing a good job taking the ball out of his hands, and Anthony Edwards very frustrated with that after the game. But the great players never use defensive coverage as an excuse. They just don't. And I felt like he was a little bit after the game last night.
He definitely was. He was frustrated, by the way, from the opening tip, because this was a game I watched this morning. I did not watch it live. So I had seen his post-game comments before I watched the game, and maybe that, gave me a lens for which to watch the game. But it was the first 3 minutes where he's calling for fouls. He's jumping up and down. He's frustrated. You could just tell that he was in an irritable mood this entire game. And so that was one of my notes, and we're going to get to that in a second. My other 2 notes for the Wolves here, because this game was more interesting for Minnesota to me than it was for Boston. Boston was shorthanded and got the win. They're obviously really good. The Wolves don't have a go-to action. And you saw a lot when the going went tough for Boston. They would go to Derek White, Jayson Tatum pick and roll. They know what they're going to get out of that. They know exactly what they're going to do. Minnesota didn't have that. When things got tough, you never knew what you were going to get from them. Out of timeouts, even just in the half court, like, okay, we need to settle things down here. They don't know what their bread and butter is. And I think you have to have some kind of, this is who we are at our core when things go tough. And they just seem so far from discovering that.
No, I agree. And look, there is truth to the fact that you look at their starting lineup and you look at, and I saw an interesting article this morning on this, and you find data different places. The number of minutes their starting five has played together compared to any other group of five players, and it's like 4-1. And that to me is not great with this team, because I like when they've got lineups out there with Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, even DiVincenzo, I think, who has really not tapped into what he was in New York yet. When you have Rudy Gobert out there, Jaden McDaniels, who's very streaky, Mike Conley, who's clearly like right at the end of his career, he's lost a lot, and I'm a huge Mike Conley fan. And then you've got Anthony Edwards out there, and with Julius Randle, who doesn't space like Cat, but has the ball a lot. The spacing is just not very good. And yet that's the lineup that's on the floor so much more than any other group. So there is truth in that. And they rolled the dice on something. It hasn't really panned out. They were conference finals. That's now a 500 team. But I think for me, right now, I look at this team. I don't know if they're going to continue to roll out the same starting lineup, and that's the lineup you want to go with the majority of the game every night. I think they're going to continue to have problems. They're going to be very streaky and inconsistent, and they're going to be a mediocre team. And in the Western Conference, that all adds up to either a play-in loss or a first-round loss to somebody. That's probably where they're headed.
Yeah. Well, two things are interesting about the lineups that they have to play. One, they go to 0 point guard lineups quite often. I mean, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is my guy, but he is not a point guard. And they also go to lineups that don't have Rudy Gobert, like last night in the clutch. Obviously, Boston's a perimeter-oriented team. That's tough for Gobert, but they closed that game without him. And so I look at that and I go, they're great on ball, Boston is, defensively, and Minnesota had a hard time getting into their sets just because there was no true point guard on the lineup. And if you bring in a Conley and you're going to close with him, which I think they'll do more often than not, if you do that, you lose a little bit of just some of your scoring and spacing and length, more importantly. So they have a little pickle in that they seem to have offensive lineups, defensive lineups, no blended lineups. And then when you do blend, you lose your point guards. So that's, to me, was something that stood out, is they just didn't seem to have any combination of players that they felt comfortable with for the problem they had.
Explain to me how Minnesota could have 28 points in the paint against a team like Boston without Porzingis.
Right. Yep.
Explain that. Like, I know Boston has some good individual defenders, but by the way, Jaylen Brown wasn't on the floor, who's one of the best in the league. So you take him off the court, you take your only real length that you play off the floor. Al Horford is certainly a guy we love, but Al Horford's not some intimidating presence on the back line of your defense. I just didn't think Minnesota applied, the pressure that they could have applied to this team the way that Boston was set up on this night. Because if you beat Boston when they play their smaller lineups, if you beat Boston initially off the dribble, you've got a pretty good chance of getting to the rim, making something good happen. And they didn't really, to me, take advantage of that. To me, this game stayed close for one reason. And one reason Minnesota was able to make the run initially after getting down big, down 14. They make the run to get back in it the first time. And then again, once they're down like 8 with like 2 minutes to go, they make another run to get it to a one-possession game because Boston continued to shoot threes. Boston did not have the close the game mentality of taking downhill opportunities where you get to the line, or even a three that started with a downhill penetration and a kick out when a guy's toed up, lined up, squared up to the basket. They were still taking quick ones. Tatum was taking still more off the dribble that were tough shots, and allowed Minnesota to string together a few stops. And, DiVincenzo gets fouled on the three. You got this thing to within a one possession game, which, by the way, go back and look at the last play of the game. Minnesota runs that side out of bounds, 3.5 seconds to go, down 3. It was really a jumbled set. Nothing really productive really came out of their initial action. So Anthony Edwards runs sort of back up the sideline right in front of the inbounder so he can receive the pass. and he spins out of it toward the 3-point line. Take a look and freeze it as Anthony Edwards comes off of that action. He's got 2 defenders with him. He gets up where he's squared up to the 3-point line at the basket. Look to his right with still 2 seconds on the clock. And Naz Reid is standing there without anybody within 15 feet of him. Julius Randle's also out there open, but he ends up diving to the rim, trying to like get in there for a rebound potentially or something. Naz Reid floated over toward the corner on the same side of the court that the ball was inbounded. They completely left him to go chase Anthony Edwards. My point is, that's an opportunity right there. Make a play. Trust your teammate. Naz Reid had a pretty decent night shooting the ball from the 3, strung together some in the second half. Trust the guy to make a play. But Anthony Edwards had one thing on his mind. And I think that is part of Anthony Edwards' DNA. He thinks every single big possession late has to be him. And the great players can think that way, but they can make the adjustment when it's necessary. Because and look, don't get me wrong, those guys get criticized sometimes wrongly when they kick it out to a good shooter in that spot and those guys miss. Those guys I understand the media wants to attack them, and social media, people that don't know what they're talking about, want to attack those guys for making that play. Look at that play again and freeze it. That's the right play to make in that situation. Give Naz Reid a wide open, clean look, squared up to the basket. You got a much better chance of sending that game to overtime than the shot that Anthony Edwards got off.
Well, you mentioned now they're struggling. I think we're going to get into some of Ant's comments post-game here now, but they are, if you look at the standings, there is a little separation starting to go on now. We've been waiting for it. It's January. And now the Timberwolves find themselves at 17-16. That's 3 losses behind the 4-seeded Denver Nuggets. 3 games in the loss column is starting to become a number, and if you look at Houston, who right now is in the 3 seed, they're 5 games behind. Almost halfway through the season, 5 games is a lot. So we're starting to see the West shake out into these sub tiers now a little bit. And Minnesota, unfortunately, is finding themselves in the bottom, that 3rd tier, not even the 2nd tier anymore. But after the game, Anthony Edwards had some interesting comments. And I have a clip I want to play for you, Legs. I don't know if you saw this. Maybe you just read it, but I want to play it for our audience right now.
I don't know, man. That was a good brand of basketball, but it's not how I want to play, of course. I mean, I'm only 23. I don't want to just be passing the ball all night. You feel me?
You don't do Mike Conley.
Yeah, at all. But the way that they guarded me, I think I have to. So
I was gonna say, how hard is it to just stay engaged?
Super hard.
Yeah.
Super hard.
Mm-hmm.
Super hard. I mean, because I'm wired to score the ball.
Do you think that's what teams are trying to do to you, like mentally trying to take you out of a game?
I don't know. I don't.
You like that?
I mean, that might be a part of it, but I know they're just doing it. Yeah. I don't know if their plan is let's mentally take them out, but because it don't take me all the way out of the game, but it definitely frustrates me a little bit. But them doubling me definitely is bro, what is going on? So yeah, I be trying to figure it out, man.
Double teams. It's good basketball, but I don't like it. This reminds me in a lot of ways. First of all, let me say this. I love that Anthony Edwards is so candid, even when he says things that I think reveal maybe a weakness, right? And this is how I view this one. I appreciate that he says it, but it reminds me when Devin Booker called timeout during a pickup game to say no double teaming. I don't like that. I don't like double teaming. Let's just play straight up. Part of me goes, what? This is the game. You're going to have to, this is the formula for you to win this year is you have to become a better passer. And he's saying, I'm not wired like that. What do you make of that, Legs?
I think the only time you can get pissed off about getting double teamed is if you're at the health club in a pickup game. That's frustrating. Okay? That's frustrating because that says everybody knows that goes against the code. That's against pickup code. I don't think I've ever heard an NBA player express disdain for double teams the way he just did. Because here's the thing. If you say, man, I'm getting doubled all night and, I'm just making the play that's there. If I'm double teamed, I have to give the ball up and we got to do a better job of making teams pay if that's how they want to defend me. That is by saying that, without calling anybody out, you're basically saying we got to be better offensively. But, get double teamed. It's accepting, understanding that's part of the league as being a great offensive player. That happens. You recall hearing guys, because that's not what he said. He's basically almost expressing frustration with, come on, Celtics. Come on, man. Can't you play me straight up? Like, what is he talking about? That's welcome to the reality of the NBA when teams have, especially a guy like Joe Mazzulla, who is like, that guy probably watches more film than any coach in the league. Like, he's coming up with any angle he can, and you have a team that has some spacing issues that I've talked about. Yeah, you're going to do everything you can to get the ball in Anthony Edwards' hands so he doesn't get really hot early and find a rhythm where he's going to be a serious problem for you all night. That's what Boston wanted to do. So the frustration shouldn't be with, I don't really want to play this way, getting double teamed all the time. You know what I mean? Like, what's really going on out there? What's going on is teams are trying to beat your team. Right, and they think that's the best way to do it. And great players don't complain about that strategy. They don't. They might get frustrated with the fact that they're losing games, and that's happening because guys aren't making them pay. That's totally different, and that would be justified in some cases. That was weird because it was almost like he's frustrated with the fact that teams are allowed to double team him. Like, come on. Again, like he's playing in a pickup game. Like, that's not what this is, man. These are high stakes, and teams are coming at you with a game plan because they don't necessarily think you're good enough with your ability to pick them apart out of those double teams. Yeah. And if you make teams pay enough, got news for you. They're going to change up strategy. Now, listen, if you're making great reads all night and dudes go 3 for 15 from the 3-point line and wide open catch and shoots, then you did your job, and you could be frustrated with that. But teams are banking on the fact that, like, you're not going to go pick us apart because you can make any pass on the court to anybody in any situation. And the superstars in this league, most of those guys typically can.
I think I'm going to come to his defense in one way because I agree with all of this, but there is a little other perspective of this. And that is, I think a lot of what he's talking about is there's just a lack of spacing in general on this team, that there's a roster construction now whereby he's needed to draw double, get the ball out of his hands. But even when he has an attacking lane, those lanes close up really quickly because there's just not a lot of spacing. And he went on to say, later on in the interview, he says, I think everybody else has been playing good on my team besides me. I got to figure it out, find ways to help them. They have been hitting shots lately. I got to find a way to get myself involved in the offense by not letting the double team take me out, and I'll figure it out. So he did throw some blame on himself, credit his teammates. Like the one quote we played isn't all of it. He tried to provide a broader context. But at the same time, I do think what he's really voicing is a frustration of the roster construction, which is asking, at least from his perspective, asking him to sacrifice all of his favorite parts of the game and the parts of the game that he's best at, and forcing him into the parts of the game he's least good at and clearly, as he said, least enjoys.
Well, one of the problems that they have, honestly, with it too, and I'll back you up on this point, he shouldn't be handling the ball as much as he is up the floor as a primary ball handler. It reminds me a lot of Donovan Mitchell in Utah during those years where it was like, okay, particularly in like the bigger moments in the game. Like it's nice when someone else can help facilitate that so you can go get off the ball and catch it in a more advantageous position than operating from a live dribble all the time coming up the floor. And I think but here's the problem. Who is that person if it's not him? Because Mike Conley doesn't put that kind of pressure on defenses anymore. Yeah. He's just not on that level. You're playing Mike Conley absolutely to pass first. You're not going to play him as a lethal threat to try to beat you at that spot. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is really not on that level as a primary ball handler. Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah, him too.
And his handle's not good enough. Dante DiVincenzo is I love everything about his game, and he could be more explosive as a scorer than the two guys I just mentioned, but he doesn't have a good enough handle to command against pressure up the floor to get the ball in the spot it needs to be delivered to a guy like Anthony Edwards coming off a flare screen or coming off some sort of pin down action or something you want to run to get him the ball on the move initially. Instead, it ends up being Anthony Edwards dribbling the ball up the floor, particularly in big spots. And it's just a lot to ask of a guy that's not Luka Doncic. He's not LeBron James. He's not one of those guys that will invite that kind of traffic because he will absolutely get the ball in a frozen rope to the other side of the floor to a three-point shooter or hit a lob pass perfectly or hit a pocket pass perfectly. That's not what Anthony Edwards' strength is. He's a raw scorer, and he's improved his playmaking, but he's got a long way to go to get into that category of player that there's no answer for if you double team him. There are answers for Anthony Edwards. Just take the ball out of his hands as much as you can, and you got a good chance to beat them.
Another crazy stat for him, Legs, here, and then we got to move on. But he is on pace to have 35 dunks this year. That would be about half of his career average. If you go to a Timberwolves game and you see a dunk from Anthony Edwards, it's a rarity. It actually happens about half the time right now. Half of the games he'll have one dunk. So that tells you how much his shot profile has changed. Some of that probably of his own volition, but some of that as well, the team and roster construction and just his inability now to get to the rim the way he used to. We went to the mailbag, though. We're going to finish up today's show by answering some of your user-submitted questions. I highly encourage you, if you enjoy the show, you listen to it every day, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram so you can hop in and be part of our mailbag. I don't know why my camera keeps shutting off today, overheating or something. Very strange. But you don't need to see my beautiful face. We can just go ahead and bring up our very first mailbag question. What do we got, James? Johnny says, since I'm a homer, what would you do with the mess that is the Pelicans if you were the GM? This is a tough one, man. They might be of all the jobs you could accept right now to be a GM of a team, the Pelicans might be the toughest one. That would be a tough one. What would you do to fix them right now if you were in charge?
I'd pull a big giant U-Haul moving truck up to the arena, and I would say everything must go. Everything must go. I mean, it's all on the table.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have Brandon Ingram is a guy that obviously is going to be the top of the list because he's very talented. He's got the right age, and I think he could be a difference maker. Zion Williamson, to me, also, you're going to bank anything on who do they have to build around on their roster right now that consistently is available to them and highly productive? They don't have it. CJ McCollum he's a really good player. CJ McCollum is not the player he was even 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. So you look at the roster, for me, it's all open. It's time you'd have to seriously consider trading them all. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, all of them, and start this thing over and rebuild and retool and look to the future. And I think, I've heard you look at what they want for Brandon Ingram. It's a young, potentially all-star caliber down the road player, cap relief guy, whoever that may be on a given roster, an expiring contract and picks. Now, I don't know, how you feel about Brandon Ingram, if you would be willing to do something like that, but Brandon Ingram has a very unique skill set, and he's got great length in doing that as one of the longer wings in this league who can score off the dribble. He's got some attractiveness to him, but what are you willing to give up to get him? And then Zion, I don't even know what the market would be for Zion Williamson right now.
None.
I really don't.
I'm not sure there is one, and he's got the 4 years, remaining on his deal. Here's what I would say about them. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, yes, get rid of them if you can, but you might not be able to. I think the real value for them in the trade market is their role players. Herb Jones is making $13 million a year. 30 teams in the NBA would pay Herb Jones $30 million to play for him. He's that good, and that contract is that good. Trey Murphy just signed a bigger deal, but you know what? I think people would take Trey Murphy because he's a phenomenal role player that gives you 3 and D. He brings some stuff to the table. And from there, I even look at all the other players. CJ McCollum would be tough to move at $31 million, but there's only 1 year left on that deal. If you have to stick with Ingram and let him walk this year, so be it. If you have to sit on Zion for the coming years till somebody's willing to take a risk on him, I would even do that. I think they have a lot of assets, though, in the middle. They're role players that can get you a rebuild, but I agree with you. To me, I would give up on this era of it. I don't think there's 1 or 2 moves that get you back into the hunt. I think this is a full-on tear it down, start over, and just try to collect assets the way that a true rebuild begins. All right, what's our next mailbag question? Joshua says, what team that is a seed 5 or below in either conference do you think has a chance to make a deep playoff run as currently constructed? This is a fun one. So you got to be 5 or below. It's fun because 5 or below, like the Bucks are 5. That one's not too hard. Dallas Mavericks are 5. So do you have one, the spirit of this, maybe just kind of a dark horse team that you think could make a run in either conference?
If you go 5 or below, it's clearly Dallas would be the team that you're going to. They're 5 now. So if you really meant below that, so for the purpose of this argument, 6 or below.
Yeah. Okay.
In the Eastern Conference, I would say Indiana. I think Indiana's starting to get their act together. Tyrese Halliburton. I think Tyrese Halliburton has found his swagger again a little bit for me. And I've been critical of him because I've said his floor's too low. On the nights he's been bad this year, he's been non-existent. And again, it's the burden of stardom. And and really the responsibilities that you have to be labeled that in the first place. He's been a little bit more consistently finding those big nights where he's the dominant force on the floor. I would probably say Indiana for them. I think that they're starting to get their act together a little bit after a very disappointing start. In the Western Conference, man, I don't know that I love any of those teams. Maybe Phoenix. I haven't given up totally on Phoenix, I guess, because
But you're also not buying them.
I mean, the Lakers maybe. You know, the Lakers are playing better right now. They've been very streaky. But
Clippers
right now,
can get Kawhi back.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's what you just said. You just said a mouthful right there. You know,
That was
I remember
response.
being out there in the preseason, or not preseason, early regular season, opening night, and we asked Tyronn Lue about Kawhi Leonard. You know, what's his status? He goes, well, you know, doing a lot of work on the VersaClimber right now. He's in the pool a lot. And I said, well, that's, you know, as your best player goes, you don't want to hear that he's a great swimmer. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. And I want Kawhi back as much as anybody, but any sentence anymore to starts off with, if Kawhi's healthy, I just tune you out.
All right. There you go. What's our next one here, James? Germ says, Legs, you only get to call games for one team. Okay. ESPN calls you up, says you get to pick one team. If they make it to the playoffs or once they get eliminated, you follow suit. So which team do you pick? Factoring in, you call all of their games, and as soon as they're eliminated, you're eliminated from calling games.
That's really easy, man. It's Oklahoma City without question, because one, I think that, you know, based on your premise of the question, you know, I want to call as many games as possible. I think they've got a deep run in them, but more importantly, they don't bore me when I watch them. They entertain me because they've got a little bit of everything. They're a great defensive team. They've got a star that's a mid-range player primarily, which this league doesn't have enough of. And they've got enough three-point shooting, but they've got depth. They're just a team that interests me every night. And I was telling Adam before we came on today, even that game last night, you know, Boston, Minnesota ends up with a great finish. There's almost 100 three-pointers taken in that game. 100. 96 threes were taken in that game. It does numb you a little bit, the monotony of it. And I don't feel that way when I watch Oklahoma City.
I thought you were going to say Denver so you could visit your guy. You know,
there you go.
I thought that's what you were going to pander.
Look, game schedule, more game schedule's been handed out. It looks like I got a couple trips coming to Denver.
That's true. That's true. What do we got next here? Flo says, Legs, how was it playing one season in France in early 90s on and off the court? Flo has been begging me to ask you this question for a while, so I'm glad we finally get to it. Playing in France, what do you remember?
I got to do this. I got a couple quick stories about this. So first of all, I go over there, right? I'm out of college. I was in the CBA, and an opportunity opens up to go to France, make some real money, and extend my dream of making it to the league, because I hadn't really tested that yet. Went over there. I was on the best team in France at the time, Limoges. They were like the Celtics of the 60s in France. They won it pretty much every year. I went over there. I joined a great team. And first things first, I went over there, and the guy I replaced, which I didn't know I was replacing because it was an American player that got hurt that didn't want their doctors to operate on him. And they were in this stalemate. And I go over there. I don't even know that this situation is going on. I get taken to my apartment by the team. We unlock the door. We walk in, and that player is sitting in the living room with his feet up on the coffee table and asks me what the hell I'm doing walking into his apartment. And that player was Kelly Tripucka. Tripucka, former All-Star in the NBA. So that's first. I'm like, well, I told me I was replacing somebody. I didn't know it was you, but I don't know what's going on. He asked me to stay in a hotel for the night so he could sort it out. I did. He was gone the next day. So I replaced Kelly Tripucka. And I had a Yugoslavian coach who didn't speak a word of French.
Who was it?
So he spoke Yugoslavian. It was translated into French by the guy right next to him. And then a French player told me. So this guy would go on a 5-minute rant, and I would get, what did he say? Get back on defense better. Like, that guy just talked for 5 straight minutes. What are you talking about right now? So the language barrier was interesting because I realized quickly he wasn't talking to me most of the time, so I could just ignore the rants and just go play. They brought me over there to score. I did that. they were happy with that. Last quick story. You'll love this one. The town, it was so important to this small town, Limoges, about 2 to 3 hours south of France, to win, that when I first got there, I walked down to the train station every day to get a USA Today newspaper. So I had a link to the States and I could read my news, and I was happy with that. And every day, that woman behind the counter who didn't speak a word of English took one of my papers and put it under the register for me, knowing I would be coming in to give me that paper. We won 10 straight games when I got there. That paper was in my hand every single day. We finally lost a game. I walked in there and she acted like she had never seen me before. It was one of the strangest things I've ever dealt with. It was all of a sudden, I'm like, literally thought I'm in the Twilight Zone. What are you talking about? I'm in here every day. She's acting like I have no idea who you are. Get out of here. She's about to call the police on me because I can't get my hands on the paper. So the pressure of winning over there was unlike anything I really had ever experienced in my life. And the repercussions for losing were far reaching. So overall, though, you know what it did? Put money in my bank account, which bought me time to chase my dream. And my dream came true shortly thereafter when I came back to the States and embarked on my NBA career. But that really bought me time because I had no money. And it also made me grow up because I was overseas by myself in my very early 20s and with grown men. And it was like I had to fend for myself and learn how to be a little bit more independent. And I came back a much better player, much more mature. And I was able to chase my dream, and I made it happen shortly thereafter.
That's awesome. You played for Bojdar Milojevic. I probably screwed that up a little bit.
That's right.
Malkovich. Okay. How was he? I'm just curious. A quick story about what it was like playing for a Yugoslavian coach.
One of the most I've never played with for anybody more demanding, more intense, or more difficult mentally. This is the honest truth. So first of all, we played one game a week. It was on Saturday, and we practiced twice a day, every day of the week, the entire time I was there, without a break. I'm talking about 2-3 hour practices dedicated to what for morning was mostly conditioning and I mean, I had shin splints on a level I didn't know existed. And then the 3 hours at night was just nothing but scrimmaging. We only had 10 players too, so there's no subs. So you're playing the whole time. I'll tell you a funny story real quick. People love these kind of stories. I got to tell you a story. So there's a guy on the team that played my position, and I realized early on he didn't really know how to play, but the guy could run all day because of the condition. They used to run up in the mountains in the preseason and all this. I missed all the preseason work. They were telling me about these torturous days up in the mountains running uphill. Yeah. This guy could run forever without getting winded, but he had no idea how to play. So I started to realize I stopped chasing him around because I realized he was like a boomerang. He would go out one side of the lane and he would run around like a chicken with his head cut off, and eventually he'd make his way right back to me. He never realized I wasn't guarding him because it was too exhausting to chase the guy, and he wasn't really that good of a player. So I realized, you know what? I'll just wait here. He'll be back in a minute. And he, sure enough, there he would come. And then I'd pick him up. So it was my way of conserving energy. But Malkovic was an interesting guy. I said he didn't speak any French or English. But I found out after about 3 weeks of being there, he spoke Spanish. And I took 6 years of Spanish.
Okay.
So we were I was the only player on the team that could directly communicate with him because I could speak Spanish to him in a gym with a lot of Yugoslavs and French. Yeah. And I'm speaking Spanish to the coach because we learned, that was our commonality. Overall, I think we had great respect for each other, but there's no doubt I would never want to experience that again.
I love that anecdote. I kind of thought that's how it was going to go. That's why I asked. All right, we got a couple more. Let's get to a couple more here. Benjamin says, Legs, which arena did you most enjoy to play in, and which did you hate playing in? Big fan of the show.
Man, I hated the Garden. I hated Madison Square Garden. I don't know why. Maybe it was those Knicks teams that I played against where like felonious assault was a common occurrence. If they could take you out of a game very easily defensively because of the amount of holding and grabbing. And I always felt the rims were really tight. And I don't know. I just never really enjoyed playing in Madison Square Garden. Man, I loved playing in Dallas, and I was glad I got to play there for a couple years. I don't know what it was. They had soft rims, great shooting perspective behind the baskets, I felt like I always looked forward to going to Dallas. Actually, Houston, San Antonio, like that whole Texas swing you would make when I was playing in Washington. I really looked forward to that shooting environment in Texas.
All right. Last one we have for you here before we get out. You have it there, James. Meep says, who do you think will be the next Western Conference team to throw in the towel? The Pelicans have given up already, and the Warriors, Suns, and Kings all look like they are a 0-3 week away from blowing it up. So if we just say the teams that have thrown in the towel, Portland, Utah, New Orleans, those teams have already thrown in the towel. Is there one more that you think is coming up, or do you think it's a while before somebody just punts on the year?
Listen, I'm going to address the three teams you brought up because I don't think any of those teams are in this category. Golden State's never going to do that as long as they have Steph Curry. Like you can't take that approach with Steph Curry on your roster. With what he's given that organization, knowing he's in the twilight of his career, you can't take that approach. You've got to feel like, hey, man, he's still playing at a fairly high level. We got to continue to try to win games. And the start they had just backs that up. So whether they can get there or not, it's a different conversation. They're not doing it. The Suns are in the same boat because of Kevin Durant. You can't take that approach. The Kings would be the most likely. The problem is, look, you don't make a coaching change the way that they did if you think that's where you're going to go. You think this team is vastly underachieving. Let's make a change and see if we can kickstart this thing. So I honestly don't think any of those three teams would fall into that category. New Orleans is a different situation, man. You find yourself 5-29 and your best players are hurt all the time. Yeah, you're probably going into that mindset of, like we said, fire sale coming, but you're not going to give these guys away. That's not an easy situation to rectify because of the contract of Zion Williamson, his lack of availability to go with it. And then you got Brandon Ingram here, knowing that, he's a guy that could walk on you. So that becomes now a buyer's market if somebody wants to make a run at him.
Yeah. All right, let's go to wrap up the week now by doing our weekend slate presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Get started with 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com/AllNBA. James, I know we have 2 Jokic Wemby games this weekend, one at home, one away. I'm very excited for that because those ones are always good. You've also got Celtics Rockets, which should be a rock fight. Knicks Thunder should be super high scoring and interesting. Cavs versus Mavs. We'll see if the Mavs can slow the Cavs down. They're on a West Coast trip right now and beating everybody. Hawks, Lakers. What stands out to you about just those first 2 days?
Man, I'll take that whole Friday night slate. I know the Mavs don't have Luka, but especially those first 2 games, man. Celtics, Rockets. And James took it down. What's that second game?
Okay. By the way, Ime Udoka versus the Celtics, always fun
too. Knicks and Thunder.
Yeah, banger.
You know how I feel about those elite point guards going head to head. It seems like those guys want to lift their leg and mark their territory more than anybody in this league.
That'll be great, man. Saturday, Nuggets Spurs again. Grizzlies, Warriors, Hawks, Clippers is good. And then on Sunday, the games we're going to be talking about. But Legs, let me ask you a question. Celtics Thunder, to me, is the most likely finals matchup. And this game is buried on League Pass during the final week of the NFL season. What is the league doing? How do they not make that a marquee game that's on ABC or ESPN or something? Instead, they bury it during football?
I think the league has taken a cue from a year ago when the Thunder had the best record in the Western Conference, and they weren't feeling like they were registering on people's radar. I think people feel a little bit differently. I think they feel a little bit differently about them this year because this is year 2 of this, and they got better even in the offseason. They haven't been complete yet. Thunder, I agree with you, by the way. I think right now, look, some people might think Cleveland can pull this thing off against Boston with as good as they've been. But I agree with you. I think the most likely, as we sit here right now, right at the start of the new year, it would be OKC Boston, most likely finals matchup. And I just still think there's a mentality around the Thunder not generating that type of interest. And it's a shame because, like I said to you before, that's the team that I would most like to sit there and call 82 games for and get to watch that every night because it's that entertaining and it's just great basketball on both ends.
Well, that's the game we're going to be talking about on Monday for sure, as well as the Commanders and the Broncos. We have to get those in to if they see how they did.
Listen, Washington, we got to go to Dallas. I say we because I'm on the
you're
charter.
on the team.
We're going to Dallas. Right? We play them Sunday. Dallas has nothing to play for. It's an interesting situation because if you win which I would love to, you could avoid the Eagles potentially right off the bat in the playoffs, which I'd love to do. You'd get the Rams. I'd much rather play a team that hasn't seen Jaden Daniels yet than a team like Philly that we've played twice, even though we beat them the last time. So we got a lot to play for. Sunday, 1:00, man. Guess where I'll be.
Yeah, Broncos have to beat the Chiefs. Chiefs have nothing to play for, but it's a division rival. Broncos need it to get in.
Oh, by the way, real quick, how do you feel about Saquon Barkley not playing Sunday?
I hate it. Actually, it's such an NBA move. Go out there, go for the record.
It sounds like he was honest about it. It sounds like he hates it too, and he said his family hates it even more. They're very upset about it, but he's a class act, and he took the approach. He made his point, but then said, "Hey, man, whatever's best for the team." But man, oh man, this is what somebody was telling me last week. They should have left him in to pick up another 40 or 50 in that game. He could have in the fourth quarter, because it was a blowout. He could have done that to make it where you could have wrapped this up potentially by the end of the first quarter. Instead, you probably would have to play at least into the third quarter. And I guess they're just like, it's just not worth it for what we have. But it stinks, man. That record's been around a really long time, and Eric Dickerson is going to hold on to it for a little bit longer.
Yeah. All right, we got a couple super chats to get us out here. We got Justin of the Wild. He says, Legs, besides the fans, when you are on an NBA court, what are you hearing? We hear so little of it on TV, but I'm curious about your experience. Thank you. Are you hearing guys talk?
It's a great question. No, like you're talking about when I played. I'm assuming you're saying when I played.
I think he's talking about when you're calling games, perhaps, but perhaps it is when you played. Do both.
I think he means when I'm playing. That sounds like he's directing at players in general. And I can tell you this. This is true. This is the truth. When I was playing, there was stuff that was taking place during the game in terms of music or entertainment or crowd music pumped in during the game, like they do sometimes on a big possession when you're on defense. And I'm telling you, the game would end. I'd go and I'd meet up with my family or whoever after the game, and they would ask me about it. I had no idea what they were talking about. You're tuning it out so much, other than chorus of cheering because you did something good, chorus of boos because you didn't. Like you're always going to pick up that vibe and energy from the crowd. But I wasn't in tune with individual comments directed my way or the way of somebody else or any of the stuff that's surrounding the game, man. You're so laser focused on your assignment. The next thing you have to do, a lot of that stuff, believe it or not, is tuned out.
Yeah, I was the same way, by the way. I think that's just a normal thing. Cedric Exquisite says, Legs for you. Jimmy to OKC, Clippers, Milwaukee. Who gets him first? You can give a quick answer.
Milwaukee one would be interesting to me, and the Clippers. I don't think OKC. I don't think that would make sense for them.
Yeah, they're too established who they are.
With their chemistry to even tinker with that.
Yeah, and I think we got one more. Teddy Hart says, just hoping SGA doesn't lose MVP twice. If Thunder go after Cam Johnson, what is their floor ceiling? That one makes more sense, doesn't it?
They go after Cam Johnson. I think their ceiling is winning the whole thing. Guess what? Their ceiling might be winning the whole thing regardless. Whether you make a move or not. That is their ceiling. I mean, like you got to look at that team and say they absolutely could win it this year. We don't have to make predictions on it yet. We're early in January, but their ceiling already to me is a champion. Floor, I guess, would be second round exit. I mean, I think that's possible in the West, somewhere in there. Like Cam Johnson, man, adding Cam Johnson. For them to get a small forward on that level that can shoot the ball like that'd be huge, man. That might put them over the top.
I think they're going to do something like that. Matt Herndy says, instead of trading for a big name in a panic, can my Dubs add Sexton and Kessler or Robert Williams and then reassess in the offseason? Steph, Sexton, Wiggs, Dre, Kessler with Dennis, Buddy, Kuminga, TJD off the bench. What do you think? Does that move the needle enough for you?
Man, I don't know. I'm worried about them now. Like this is going on for quite a while here. What you're watching out of them, and it just seems like they are squeezing every ounce of juice out of their roster right now. So those additions would help. Does it make a difference and move the needle a ton? They're sitting at ninth in the West. When you start talking about those top teams, I think that'd be very difficult for Golden State to win any of those series.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, cue that outro music there, James. Guys, thanks for hanging with us on this Friday. We touched on a lot of topics. That might be the most topics we've ever hit on in one show, Legs. We went around the league.
Yeah, that's the first time I told my France USA Today story. That's a good one.
The people want more, man. They want
We gotta
more.
make some stories from my playing, because I played in the CBA, Europe, and the NBA, and on a variety of different teams, good and bad. I got a lot more stories in the vault. We got to get to them.
We're going to have story time with Legs become a regular thing. But we appreciate you guys hanging out with us, man. Make sure you subscribe. We are going to have videos over the weekend with Mark Stein. Me and him sat down and had a nice chat about the Sacramento Kings, about the Cavs, about Jimmy Butler. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure you're subscribed. Also subscribe on our podcast apps so you can hear us on the go or in your car at the touch of a button. Everybody hit that like button on the way out. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
All silly like the mayor.